Okay, let's add one more listener just to kind of see what it looks like to continue extending on top of an existing event. Let's go back to our resource pack directory and we'll open up step 50, adding a second listener to front.php. Go ahead and copy the code and paste the code over the code in your front.php file and save it. So the only thing we're adding here is this second listener. We structure the first part the same way. We're listening to the response event. Our anonymous function here is taking the response event object. We're grabbing the response, and this time we're grabbing the headers. And what we're going to do is set the content length header inside of this listener if that header hasn't been set already. So sometimes content length isn't that important, but in certain cases it's critical. So this is actually a valid use case. So we check to make sure it doesn't have the content length heading, and we check to make sure it also doesn't have a transfer encoding heading, which replaces content length. They're mutually exclusive, so we wouldn't have transfer encoding and content length. So if these two conditions are met, then what we're going to do is set the content length to the length of the text inside of our response, and we can get that with the getContent method. In this last line, what we're doing is setting a priority for this listener. Now, if you've worked with weights in Drupal, this priority works differently. It's the opposite of what we have in weights. With weights, the lighter the weight is, the earlier it will run. But in this case, the priority is low, and so therefore it will run last. So it's a little tricky, but think of this as priority and it will make a little bit more sense than if you think of it as weight. The idea here is that we want this to run first before this listener runs. So even though the code is being added second, this priority can explicitly set the order in which the listeners should be executed. And we can test this out if we go back to our browser. And if we open up our developer tools, I'm in Chrome right now, and we refresh, we can go to this item and click it and look at our headers. And you see that we now, if we scroll down here, we have a content length of 32. If we removed the listener, I'm going to go back to our code and click undo in order to revert to the last version of this file. And then I go back to the browser and refresh. And we click on the page again. And we scroll down here. We're not going to see a content length in our response headers. Okay, so we know it's working. I'm going to go back to the code and redo our change.